Avengers assemble one of the best movies of Marvel Phase 1, or is it just a complete miss? Welcome to Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of Avengers. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your personal thoughts. That it's not always wrong, because we all share different opinions and can share those differences down in the comments below. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe and already, join the film culture community where I'm talking about all the MCU movies leading up to Deadpool and Wolverine, and you don't want to miss it by going right into the synopsis. When an imminent threat breaks through SHIELD security into their breaches of Earth, Nick Fury must assemble the forces of this superhero task force in order to take down one of their biggest opponents yet. And go right into the positive. Overall, I just generally enjoy the essence of this film, what it carries on. In my background, this is really the first MCU movie that got me into the trenches of the MCU, having watched Iron Man years before this release, but having played this song in my concert band, the theme song for this is fantastic, and being able to play the bass on this, yes, it wasn't a huge part, but it still introduced me to the awesome music that led me to go and watch through Iron Man through this again for the first time, and following up, I followed along with the MCU along the way ever since. But just generally, even with that background, I love what this film brings out. The superheroes that assemble something great. Joss Whedon is a great director at assembling a force that actually handles each and every part of the film well. Each and every character feels well directed. The choreography for the fights, the cinematic ideas that really builds up the franchise as a whole, especially ending Marvel Phase 1 for what we didn't know what was really to come forward. It was like one of the first movies outside of the X-Men that has its inspirations from the X-Men movies, but carries on its own essence of a superhero film that you can just generally enjoy for the action, building up the music, the hype, and the progression throughout makes sense. You get the quick introduction within a prologue, and then Nick Fury building up and all the forces that gives its proper attention to each character. Now we get a new cast for what we're getting out of the characters. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Nick Fury played by Samuel L. Jackson, Natasha Romanoff played by Scarlett Johansson, Chris Hemsworth as Thor, and just so on. What we get out of each of these cast members just delivers on multiple occasions. The writing isn't necessarily perfect for what we're getting, but it still progresses in a nice manner and has good humor for the progression of the ideas and the comedy and the general essence of knowing it's a comic book film, adding in the sprinkle of comedy while also building into the heavy stakes, multiple battles that really build up the progression toward that final battle that really introduces us to the world of the alien ideas, this other dimension, alien worlds, and just how we progress to that with a superhero team that can't get together right away. It feels more believable than if you're just to make it easy, make the character dynamics simple, and adjust to each other really quickly. There's not always that ease of tension, because they all come from cultures and different backgrounds that make them sort of have opposing views, and that's what makes them more intriguing characters you can choose to love for their own quirks and pick out what your favorite is among them, even if you don't hate the opposing side, because they're meant to assemble as this one team that ultimately works out by the end. And even along the rest of the MCU, speaking outside of what this film does for it, they still don't always work on all their practical notes, because their character values remain consistent throughout, and then just getting the friendships and dynamics you build along the way. What we get out of Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, their opposing views are the most different from the rest of the group, but they still manage to really fit together in this opposing view that also offers leadership roles to both of them, and it ends up working out through different ways that make sense because they know how to work as a team once they're really forced to, once they know the imminent threat that really separates those two together versus the enemy that is at hold, and having Loki as the threat being mostly the villain in this when most of the other films of the MCU, he's the anti-villain. Just what we get out of that means so much more to what Loki's character means as a character in general, and you just love Tom Hiddleston for the progression he goes throughout the MCU. But even within this, it's good to have that full-on villain side, even if you know it's part of his subversion and manipulation of what he does in the future and also in the past, of where he's going, of who he's teaming up with in the background that we're not really getting into yet. We don't know all the details about how everything is progressing, but just the hints and teases we get along the way builds up his character in such an interesting fashion and makes him great as the full-on villain role. Even if we know in the background he's also a hero of sorts that establishes his own grounds for whoever is working best with him, and how we get all these other characters, Thor, his brother, and then just Natasha Romanoff as the Black Widow, her relationship with Clint Barton as Hawkeye. It's great to see them have their proper roles. They're not the superheroes we expect to see all the explosive action from, but they hold their own. For Natasha being this well-trained spy, we get a lot of hints toward her past, what has led her through different traumas to be a spy for S.H.I.E.L.D., and she builds up a substantial character that Scarlett Johansson is just a great actor even before. And so what this film has to offer, the MCU brings in some great A actors that has established them even more, putting them through this franchise. And so how we get their acting establishes something greater for what this film has to offer. And of course, like I mentioned, the soundtrack is fantastic for how it elevates many of the different scenes throughout the film, and with a progression from different arcs, it's clearly separated by a 3-act structure that balances its acts well, establish all of the characters, and goes through different questions and answers we get later on in the MCU that builds up this story to be something more interesting, especially as we get more films leading onto the future, not knowing that this film was the bouncing grounds to something that we're going on moving forward, but still works effectively on its own substance as its own film that establishes its grounds to be a lot more well worth what we're getting out of a franchise as a whole, because of the different opposing views, how everything balances out by the end of the day, and just well worked for the directing that Joss Whedon does for everything that pulls each and everything together. And going into some of the mixed comments, well, this film is really grand for what it has to offer. I don't particularly find it perfect for all everything it has to offer, and some of the things I'll talk about is just some things that some people may not like as much than the grand crowd that also opposes what this film has to offer. There's CGI throughout that isn't always perfect for its time. Everything it elevates is still grand, but the nature of the film is focused on the MCU of how it progresses forward. And so what it establishes, it's really self-contained, but there's also some humor that once you rewatch it quite a few times, it doesn't always land on every single joke. And so there's many hits, but some not necessarily misses, but ones that you get tired of hearing and just doesn't always work to its own wonders. The structure of how it progresses throughout the film is really grand until you really get into the third act, where some of the team starts to fall apart, and then it recovers and builds it back together. It feels a little rushed with what it's trying to do with that particular arc, how it builds on these characters, and everything that it's focusing in on, leading to the battle, ending battle. While there's different settings and locations that are marked throughout the film, there's certain marks where characters land are not important, and they sort of subside that and put the characters to where they need to be once they are at that final battle. And so there's just a little bit of a progression where you don't necessarily get the full out answers of how they get there so quickly, what characters do to travel in different ways, and everything that progresses throughout that. It's not a ruining factor for the entirety of the film as a whole. I can still really enjoy it, but there's certain subsides to certain ideas along the way that feel a little contrived or rushed to the nature of what you're trying to get when there's problems that may not need to be huge problems throughout the film. And then there's also one scene near the beginning with the first action battles that we get out of Captain America, Iron Man, and how that progresses in with this film. The music is a symphony that really is good for the nature of that, but it's also really cheesy for when they flash to the action flowing into it. I don't feel like the music fully worked to be constantly playing throughout that. I understand what they were kind of going for, but once they flash through different scenes, you don't get the same tone of when they're actually in the banquet hall with the music. And then the plane flying in from the shield jet, and also the Iron Man and everything that's going on through that. But otherwise, those are just small little nitpicks that can take a little bit out of the film as a whole. But generally, I enjoyed the film for what it's worth. Therefore, I have to rank this film as simply 8.5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the Avengers. Is it good? Is it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your thoughts of the end of MCU Phase 1. And make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Join in Film Culture community as a whole. But that's just all. Make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.